Welcome everyone. My name is Johanna Siliakus. I work for ADB's Transport Sector Office and would like to warmly welcome you to this online training workshop, which explores the key elements of e-mobility roadmap development and how those can actually drive the uptake of e-mobility. So if we can have the next slide, please. So in today's workshop, you'll learn about the key components of an e-mobility roadmap, including planning and implementation, the steps for those, policy and regulatory frameworks to support the transition, and a practical case example of roadmap development. The session has been catered for the Central and West Asian audiences in particular. However, the learnings that we'll gain from this workshop will definitely be helpful throughout the Asia and the Pacific region. So we welcome participants from all regions. The workshop is arranged under the umbrella of the e-mobility support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific. This is a knowledge platform that aims to build capacity and support the scale-up of e-mobility in the region. And this regional platform is led by the Asian Development Bank, and it forms part of a global initiative that's supported by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and UNEP as part of the Global Electric Mobility Program. We also have supporting partners, including the Green Climate Fund, the Republic of Korea e-Asia and Knowledge Partnership Fund, and Japan's High-Level Technology Fund. And before moving ahead with introducing our trainer for today and kicking off the workshop itself, I'd like to mention that we have one more online training workshop schedule, and that is for tomorrow. So the 28th of May, we will be starting a bit earlier than usual, since the target audience for this workshop is the Pacific Islands. But again, this might be interesting for anyone interested in light electric vessels. So we'll be starting at 12 o'clock noon Manila time. So 3 hours earlier than this session. So this is a session together with that we are organizing together with GIZ and with the University of Applied Sciences Emden Leer from Germany, and you'll be hearing about light electric vessels and their technical and economic feasibility. You can register from this QR code here on the screen. I'll also share a link to the registration in the chat in just a bit. And we'll also like to let you know that the support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific now also has a website, which is up and running and live. So you can access it through emobilityplatform.asia, which is the website you see here, or the QR code on the screen will take you to the website as well. And it includes information on our upcoming events, on news, as well as knowledge products such as webinar recordings, newsletters, blogs, etc. And if you wish to collaborate, for example, through writing a blog for our website, please do get in touch with us. So we're happy to discuss that further. And then finally, some house rules for this session. So please keep your mics muted unless you're invited to speak. There will be time for Q&A during this session. We'll have a midterm break, so to say, in between, and then in the end, another Q&A session. So for questions and comments, you can send them throughout the presentation. We'll then gather them for the Q&A sessions. And please use the comments box for sharing any comments or questions. And during the Q&A session, you can also raise your hand if you wish to ask your question in person. And would also like to mention that we are recording the session and we will be uploading the recording online. You will also be receiving the PowerPoint slides per email, all of you who have registered to this session. So you'll receive the PowerPoint as well later on. Okay, so let me now introduce today's prominent speaker. So we have Rahul Bagdia, Chairman and Managing Director at P Manifold, who will be delivering today's session. Rahul is a clean energy and e-mobility expert with over 20 years of experience. He's advised governments and agencies on electric vehicle strategies, policies, infrastructure, helping shape roadmaps and regulatory frameworks across various regions. So we're very happy to have you here, Rahul. Let me now hand over to you so we can kick off the session. So thank you, and over to you, Rahul.
Thank you very much, Johanna. I'm just sharing my screen. Please confirm once it's there.
Yes, we can see your screen. Your first slide is available now.
So good afternoon, good morning, my fellow colleagues. First of all, thank you very much, Johanna, ADB team, for this kind invitation. And also dear friend Moshi at ITP RSDHV for inviting me. Uh, I have worked with Moshi and ITP team in developing some national roadmaps. And I think that's how Moshi selected me for this topic. So thank you. And just a very quick introduction, I have 20 plus years now experience working in new energy sector. In P Manifold, now we have been working in 60 plus countries, helping them advance their e-mobility roadmaps and broader energy transitions, including hydrogen, carbon developments, and climate resiliency. We would have worked with some 15 plus countries, helping them develop their national roadmap. And in today's discussions, in this training format, I hope to bring those essential steps and design considerations when you design a country roadmap. I've taken an example of a country with which I have worked, a small country with less than a 500,000 population, just to kind of use as an example rather than being a generic there. So use it as a sample to kind of discuss. But I've tried that throughout the discussion that one country examples and visualizations and analysis results are getting used so that we maintain the connectivity of our discussions. So with that, let's begin. And Johanna has already requested if any questions across a slide, do put your comments and raise your hand. That will cue Johanna and me to kind of bring appropriately those discussion points. So with that, what I intend to cover, I think starting with a why, like why do we need e-mobility, what it looks like, and how to build an e-mobility roadmap for a country, for a region, sometimes also for a specific city. So how do we do that? And then we go into the some more detailed discussions across those steps so that we understand a little bit more details across those steps. And I want to then cite an example like how every country is different. So I want to throw some more data to kind of compare like how countries differ on some of the very, very important indicators. So I think this discussion should kind of give you those top 10 or 12 pointers which you can kind of understand at a country level, and that should help you judge like how this country will be different in terms of its e-mobility adoptions and ecosystem perspectives, right? So that you start thinking in that direction when you start planning for it. And lastly, I have tried to integrate some more case studies to dive into like what are the use cases of EVs and charging infrastructure integration for different applications. Because most of the country roadmaps, once it is there in place, it starts yielding into feasibilities across specific use cases like setting up and growing public charging infrastructure, or setting up and deploying intra-city or intercity electric buses for capital or some tier one or two cities, and also more on freights also. How do you bring electric trucks on freights? So I'm trying to give some of the key steps that typically goes in kind of assessing and planning for those EV pilot project deployment that start augmenting your e-mobility roadmap. So that is what I intend to bring in our discussion forward. So let's start with a why. I'm just throwing in like lot of elements which starts interacting when we talk of e-mobility. It starts with you and me as a user who is driving different vehicles on the road or who is riding on these different vehicles on the road. It can be a two-wheeler, it can be a four-wheeler, buses, paratransit vehicles like small minibus or three-wheelers in between. And we are also sharing this with the non-motorized transport, the bicycles and the walking, right? So we are sharing the road infrastructure. These vehicles are now run on different fuels. We are talking of electric mobility coming in for its efficiency, right? And replacing the fossil fuel of petrol, diesels, a little cleaner options, CNGs as well, right? We have the new alternative fuels like hydrogen and biofuels also coming, and how e-mobility plays between these fuels, how to transition between these fuels, and the world will remain with a mix of these fuels, right? We will not have only electric vehicles, we will not have only hydrogen vehicles, right? We will have a mix of these vehicles, and depending on use cases, those adoptions will happen. While we are talking of e-mobility, we also need roads, we need parking infrastructure, we need electricity access points for them. These vehicles typically at their preferred parking locations will get charged either at our home offices, which will happen for most of the time when vehicles are idle, or at a public charging stations, and for lighter vehicles, the battery swaps, right? So again, we will discuss like how for different vehicle segments, different kind of charging and those charging starts interacting with different needs and different business models. When we are talking of charging, we need to provide power supply to them. Then we get into the entire electricity value chain of generations, transmission, distribution, associated losses there. The generation mix between fossil and increasing renewables, which more and more countries are targeting. And with more and more renewable and variability, then further grid maturity and stability also becomes an issue, right? And EV is a new load, and with increased adoption, it will add up a fairly significant load to the electric grid. So how do we maintain the energy supply infrastructure is also another question that we need to discuss. And of course, each country, depending on its demography and its economy, it has either its own manufacturers or it is importing vehicles. And with e-mobility, we have seen that even small countries have started assembling and doing some part of the local value chain development in e-mobility, right? So the OEMs, the localization of the industry, the supply chain is becoming prominent and more attractive for the industry. And this can go fairly upstream in terms of the minerals, their processing and producing the battery elements also. Yeah. And finally, we need a financier who will connect and make the sales happen from OEMs to the end user. So how do we drive this financing? I understand that ADB has already organized a very interesting topic and workshop similar to this on EV financing. So I will not go much details on financing today. And to bring all these elements together, we have government who is taking or queuing the industry and the demand side end users in terms of the policies. The more stable and strong and supported these policies are, the better confidence it gives to the private to bring the ecosystem, and better confidence it gives to the end users in terms of experiencing the EVs and transitioning and going through the technology adoption curves, right? Across all its usage, maintenance and disposal and everything. And these governments work at different levels, starting from city, then region, and ultimately at the national government's level. And ultimately, all this players needs to be integrated, needs to be harmonized, and all their coordinated actions will lead into a better and more optimal technology adoptions, in this case, electric vehicles. And that can help improve our local environment in terms of cleaner air and of course the broader GHG reductions. So I think this is the overall setting where the EVs is kind of playing. And my idea of using this slide was like it's a fairly involved, interrelated system with lot of elements and nodes, and a good electric vehicle roadmap will allow a harmonized and coordinated actions, what needs to be done by who along what timelines. So I think that is what a electric roadmap can bring to a country and allow it to engage all right stakeholders, all right ministries and departments, the private players and different user segments in a right manner. Now, we discuss why. Let's understand what an electric roadmap should essentially cover, right? It starts with a very simple assessment like where do we stand today, right? The as is part of it, setting up a target and a goal, like where we want to go in terms of our EVs adoption roadmap. And then there can be multiple pathways which can lead us from our existing as is to the target goal positions, and we have to evaluate these different targets in terms of their costs, in terms of the benefits, and then we have to approach a right path or maybe a mix of these paths to reach to the goal point, right? And while we keep doing this, we need to keep monitoring, see like if there are any changed situations or dynamics, and if there are any change in any of the target positionings or the paths to reach. So I think it becomes a little continuous process, and this typically takes a form of a roadmap which keeps guiding all the stakeholders. It's kind of a lighthouse which kind of keeps giving a right signal to all the different stakeholders to act in more better coordinations. Now, what all things it encompasses itself? So, as I said, like we have to define the targets, right? We need to define like how much of EVs we want in different vehicle segments, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, buses, trucks, right? And even ships, vessels, if it's relevant to the country. Then we need to kind of target like how do we provide the right infrastructure for these different vehicle segments. And then depending on the country, we also need to define and target like what kind of an assembly, supply chain or localization the country or the region can target for this EV value chain, right? So this all goes into the setting of the targets for the EVs. And then there are two big buckets. The one bucket is like demand side measures, what I call, where we are working upon how do we stimulate demand because it's a new technology. How do we stimulate end user, create awareness, create right incentives for him to change from his existing petrol diesel vehicle to electric, right? And this demand side measures may have multiple of the policy measures, and we will discuss about them as we move forward. And the second bigger block is the supply side measures, right? You have stimulated the user, but now you also need to ensure that on the supply side, all elements are being brought together, right? You have a right charging infrastructure, you have the right supply, electricity supply to that charging infrastructure. You also have a cleaner electricity going as part of that supply so that your ultimate footprint of EVs still remain clean. And then you also have to ensure that all your dealerships, all your local industry, the supply chain part of making EVs available, repair, mechanics, the skills part of it, all that kind of coming together, right? So that's the supply side of it, which also the any EV roadmap should really strongly cater to. So broadly, three buckets for the EV roadmap: defining clear targets, defining demand side measures that will stimulate and drive adoptions between different use cases, and ensuring that you have strong supply side measures to reinforce the ecosystem and drive good high customer experience. So these are the essential elements that a typical EV roadmap will have. Now, what is the approach that as P Manifold we have taken when we have developed a multiple countries roadmap? We start with a strong baseline assessment. Where do we stand now in terms of our transport, in terms of our electricity, in terms of the local national policies. So where do we stand, right? After doing that, then going deeper into like what are the known barriers in terms of EV adoption in transitioning across the value chain, right? So we have to see across the value chain of procuring vehicles, registering them, using and charging them, repairing them, and the end of life. Across this entire value chain, where are the barriers? And then we start thinking what could be the potential measures to resolve that, right? We know that EVs gets adopted when other than the environmental and climate benefits, the end user see and has a strong reason. And that typically is the economic part of it, right? Driven by the purchase cost, which we know EV is costlier in most cases. Now, in some of the cases, depending on countries, again, the EV's purchase cost is actually starting to get lower than the ICE purchase cost. So that's an interesting trend which will further drive higher adoptions. But then we need to start looking into the total cost of ownership. So that's why we undertake TCO analysis, like how much it will cost per kilometer across the life of the vehicle. And that's where we compare our normal ICE vehicle versus EVs. And we start distincting like, okay, what and where levers we need to move so that we can start bringing TCO parity, right? So those are those policy levers, how we can reduce the cost, how we can make electricity cheaper, how we can improve the experience at charging point and improve the utilization. So all those levers then start affecting this TCOs, and it starts creating a right situation for end users to adopt EVs. And basis to that, now we need to start setting up targets, right? How much two-wheeler adoption on annual sales basis we want in, let's say, in 2030, in 2040, and forward. So those are the target settings specific to vehicles. We start need to doing it. Then there is some more modeling that gets involved. And the whole idea is like to set up those policy measures and be able to study them in a closed loop setting. Like, okay, if I do this policy measure, does it help to reduce this cost or helps us mitigate this risk for this stakeholder? And this has a higher chance of driving higher adoptions and possibly better target setting, right? So it then becomes a little closed loop in designing these policy impact measures. Then we start doing the assessment of these policy measures because government act a very important role, especially in transitioning to this new technology in the early market development space. Then one of the assessments beyond clean air and GHG is like how this policy will impact government, right? What will be the cost to the government? What will be the benefits to the government? And bringing it more to the country's realistic point, we then have to remodel or re-undertake the target setting. And in those joint consultations, again, it's a closed loop. So we are looking at policies and we are assessing them in a closed loop setting with lot of stakeholder consultations, but aiding those decisions with strong financial and other metrics modeling and be able to take and reach to a final point of a e-mobility roadmap. So that's a typical step that we undertake to develop this e-mobility roadmap. So now let's start looking into each of these steps through an example country that I am proposing. So this country is some small country, one small country with, as I said, like sub 500,000 population. In terms of its vehicle stock, you can see like it stands at some 40,000 vehicles. And if you notice that these vehicles are 40% of them are light mopeds and with very little three-wheelers, primarily in commercial case, but mostly it's motorcycles with a fairly kind of equal private personal use and commercial taxi applications. And there is a high dominant, almost 55% of the cars getting used. And within that, personal private cars takes a higher share and four-wheeler taxi applications is the second share. And you see that buses and trucks exist, but a fairly small portion of the current vehicle stocks in the country, right? So This is where you can start in understanding the use cases in the country. And we have benefited immensely by traveling to the country and interacting with the operators, fleet operators, or individual users of this vehicle segments, and talking to the dealers to start understanding the different operational and financial characteristics of each of these vehicle segments, right? What routes these vehicle segments are getting run, what are the typical behaviors, how many kilometers they are typically running, what is their current efficiency, how old are these vehicles. Most of these countries, especially developing countries, they are importing used vehicles, and life of these vehicles in countries like Africa can go even beyond 20 years, right? So that's the kind of below Euro 1 kind of a vehicle that is getting run with high inefficiency, high cost repair maintenance to the end user, but that system is still kind of working. So I think being in the country and between those stakeholders really drive lot of useful characteristics, because EV is not about just transitioning the powertrain. It's not just a technology intervention. You have to really understand the underlying dynamics. Like for example, I'm currently now working in Nepal on electric bus planning project. And in one of the city, there is almost 50% oversupply of the buses, right? And these are mostly predominant 9 meter, 7.5, 9 meter buses, all diesel buses running and owned by private operators, but it's oversupply of the buses. So in this oversupply of this ecosystem, if you are trying to add a layer of e-bus, which is already costly, right? The TCO parity again pose a challenge. I think then we are missing, like, how do we drive the change into the system? We can complete the technical part of it, but how do we drive the change for a mass scale adoption? I think that will get missed. So understanding the underlying dynamics, the user reasons of driving those vehicles, the user reasons to transition to the new thing, that starts driving towards the barrier analysis and next steps into the e-mobility roadmap. Similarly, I think being in the country and understanding the electricity landscape, very useful. This I said is a small country with small generation capacity, close to around 50 megawatt existing today. And understanding their RE share, today RE share is 16% in this case, and most of it is diesel operated, small country. Then understanding what are their RE targets, how over the last 5 years they have been able to see those adoptions in the REs. Most times you will see that NDCs are fairly ambitious in terms of the RE adoption, but the country's pathway of reaching to those points is fairly slow, right? So what is realistic? Even in many of the countries, the solar cost, levelized cost is fairly 2 times or 3 times than their other fossil cost, right? So even the solar adoptions in those countries have happened low. Why are we talking of RE? We are talking of RE to ensure that the electricity that gets used by EV remains clean, and hence the benefit of moving to a energy efficient technology, I think starts giving the fullness to the overall ambitions of transitioning. So understanding the forward years, how the capacity of generation will they be phasing out the fossil generations, and how much ramp up can happen in RE. These are also an important steps to learn in the landscape. Then there are different policies. I would not go into the policies, but very important that you understand who are the stakeholders, right? We are talking of transport. So we have to understand what are the policies, master plans, both public transport modernization, freights, their motor vehicle act related to the licensing, vehicle registrations. We have to start understanding the electricity part of the value chain, the grid codes, the electricity act. Many of the countries still have a bundled generation, transmission, distributions, right? How it impacts the overall provision of the charge point operator and supply of energy. can this charge point operator purchase power separately through RE, through open access and other tariff mechanisms like FITs or net metering? So these are all questions that start coming in, and knowing them in the early stage of your as is becomes very important. Finance Ministry deals with all the taxation policies, direct and indirect, and it applies to the vehicle, it applies to the fuels, it applies to the spare parts, it applies to pretty much everything about our services, the charging station services that will get applied. So what kind of taxations gets applied at what point, and how flexible and what kind of mechanisms and green mechanisms country has evolved on financing side allows you to kind of see like how much ambitious targets you can set up in EV adoption, which government can really kind of support. Then there's an industry and trade. This division typically wants more increased local enterprise and industry and localizations, producing incentives, not just for adoption, but also for production linkage, incentives to the plants. So all those things related to standards, very important. How do you ensure quality of vehicles coming in the country or getting output to the end users, both for used vehicles or new vehicles? So the industry and trade ministry or department starts kind of playing in. And climate and environment, for all the good reasons, the world that we are living in, they get involved in setting up those higher objectives, like what you want to achieve with this green technology. And with that landscaping, you get into the barriers for EVs adoption. I will not go into the detailed barriers, but I think like many of you come from already some experience into the industry, also likely e-mobilities. So on the vehicle import sides, and many of the developing countries are importing the vehicles, right? Or if not the vehicles, they are importing the substantial element that goes into the EV. I come from India, so a lot of battery materials, cell materials are still getting outside, imported from outside, right? So many of policymakers always keep this point like, hey, we are moving away from fossil import, but now we are getting dependent on all this rare earth metals and magnets and those imports. How we can kind of answer that question with your roadmap so that we can have the right ownership from different policymakers for that. So it's important to understand the vehicle imports. And as I said, like used and new vehicles, are used vehicles are fairly predominantly getting used, especially in the developing countries, more in Asia, so and also in Africa. So how do we transition this thing? Because sooner or later, used EVs will also start getting imported, right? We did one study with UNEP, documenting like what are the trends in the used vehicles and retrofits. Very interesting insights. The registration part of it, like when we go into many of the countries, the custom department still do not have a mechanism of registering EV because their current HSN codes are dominated by cubic capacity, the volume of the engine, right? So the first question comes like, okay, how do I register this two-wheeler and four-wheeler? So you have to change the system. You have to have a right classification system so that then you have the right HSN code with it. You are able to align your right incentives with the right classification of the vehicles part of it. Then about the vehicle usage, if you are, as I said, it's a transition technology. You don't have to plan only for EVs coming in, but you also have to plan how do you phase out the ICE vehicles? How do you up the existing fuel standard of the petrol or diesel that is used in different vehicle segments, right? And those are also taken care by increasing vehicle emission standards. We are moving from Euro 6 now to Euro 7 domain. Many of the countries, because of high used vehicles, are still in the Euro 1. The fuels there even do not qualify as Euro 1. So these are so substandard fuels, and you can imagine the NOx and SOx emissions from those fuels. So that transitioning and phasing out of ICE is also becoming important, and understanding those barriers while we try to bring in the electricity and charging. We are now working in Lebanon, and we are seeing that the country, the grid system has almost collapsed. Like even in the capital city, the power supply is limited to 3 hours, 4 hours, right? So in such a country where energy for other reasons is highly kind of limited, how do we bring e-mobility, right? So it will have to be based also on a right appropriately roadmap on the energy and supply side as well. Then the maintenance part of it, this is coming a lot from the user in terms of their apprehension. If I purchase this vehicle, do I have the enough mechanics? If I'm riding on a road outside on highway, will I get someone who can repair my vehicle, or will I get a charging point, right? So all those issues has to be looked into across the value chain. As I said, like EVs will come in only when the old vehicles will go out, right? So have we created right policy system for end of life? Many of the countries have defined the end of life, but it is not getting implemented, right? And that is the reason that even vehicles beyond 20 years, even commercial big vehicles like trucks, are keep getting used, right? So how do we define, enforce, so that we make provision for a new clean vehicle technology coming in? And once these vehicles are coming, then another challenge is the battery recycling. So again, we have to look into the value chain and ensure that we understand it. And across this barriers, you have to start mapping your policy measures and ensure that your e-mobility roadmap is able to address these barriers, right? Then only you will have that integration to be able to see the EVs moving smoothly with high experience across the value chain. I will not go into what is TCO. It is total cost of ownership calculated in US dollar per kilometer. So it's a way of normalizing all your capital cost, all your operational cost across the life of the vehicle. And then on that apple to apple start be able to compare how different vehicles starts acting, right? So in this case, I'm comparing an petrol two-wheeler motorbike with a electric two-wheeler, right? And this is a TCO, US dollar per kilometer. And I can see that it is coming already lower, right? So even though the purchase cost of this two-wheeler, on the right-hand side, I'm showing in the graph, the purchase cost of this electric two-wheeler is 30% more than electric. But in terms of its life cycle TCO advantage, it is only 76% of the TCO cost of ICE, right? So yes, I do save money over the life cycle, but how do I go and cross this barrier of 30% high capex cost, right? And if you see more commercial vehicles like two-wheeler motorbike taxi or three-wheeler commercial or even four-wheeler taxi electric, you will see that because they are running more kilometers, you start getting the advantage of TCO, right? So it's a very important lesson that apply EVs to the use cases where you are able to have more kilometers on a daily basis, right? So that the higher cost gets spread across more kilometers and you start getting the TCO advantage. In fact, most parts of the world, EVs adoptions is higher in three-wheelers, in car commercial examples, in motorbike taxi applications, right? So those higher kilometers creates a better appeal for EVs. This is a bus, and you see that while public transportation is posed higher in mandate to turn into electric, but it's a difficult candidate from the TCO perspective. So it requires a little bit more careful handling. How do we drive buses, electrification, and public transport reforms? So TCO becomes very, very important element. And it's not about just doing TCO only for 1 year. We have to look into the trends of this TCO for years forward. You have to define like in what tenure you want to develop your electric vehicle roadmap. And for that tenure is what you are looking into the TCO. And here for this light vehicles, you see that your green electric vehicle line is already lower than your ICE cost, right? So this vehicle segments already have TCO parity even from the start. In this case of this may again change from country dynamics to country dynamics. And if you look into other segments like a four-wheeler car, personal use, you see that today the green line is above orange. So it shows that EV TCO is higher. And only in this year of 27, they both meet. And after that, it starts going down, right? So you can expect better adoption trend in four-wheeler car segments in this country post 2027. So it allows you to add a lever that, okay, post 2027, my adoptions of annual sales in annual sales for e-cars can improve. And taxi is already better now, right? Because you are running more distances. And buses, you see that it will require more interventions by the existing thing. You will see the parity only after 2037. But if government says that no, I want to drive higher edge mandates in this space, then it has to offer some subsidies and other things to drive the curve faster, right? So those are the ways and means again that will get adopted in your EV road mapping. And the previous TCO analysis that I discussed, that starts allowing you to set up the targets, right? Here I am showing that your light two-wheeler, three-wheeler commercial applications, here you can target becoming 100% faster, 100% of your sales becoming electric. This you can achieve faster, right? Buses, it's a difficult segment, but because it's a well regulated by government, we can achieve it still reasonably in next 10-15 years. Private cars, it will take some time, right? So here we have assumed 2045. And this conversions then leads into this kind of a curve for the EV, that across all EVs combined, what number of EVs on your annual vehicle sales can become electric, right? And these are the numbers, like you would have heard 30 at 30. So that means achieving 30% in your annual sales by 2030. But this country where we have developed it, it will take time. So we kind of developed a small kind of a messaging 33 at 33. Excuse me. So that means this country will target a higher than 30 target, but achieve it by 2033. So this country is standing out and saying that, hey, I am unable to do 30% at 2030, what world is kind of striving. But yes, let me attempt 33 at 2033, or maybe 35 at 35, right? So just a communication messaging to amplify that, yes, we remain committed to drive the growth, and by this year in annual sales we can achieve it. And we use this modeling framework. It's a ETEM framework that P Manifold has developed in-house, and we have used it for more than 50 countries for multiple kind of projects. And it allows us to start seeing the effect of this different EV adoptions, different for different vehicle segments, and how does this policy impact this percentage adoption and the different metrics of costs and benefits that you are evaluating, right? So the results then starts kind of going into helping you judge what targets to keep for what EV segments. I was requested to also discuss like how we typically do demand projections. It's a science, but it's also an art, right? The more segments you have of your different vehicle segments, the better understanding of how the users are adopting those segments, then you can adopt multiple approaches in terms of demand projections. One is a KEGAR based extrapolations. Another is the GDP per capita elasticity approach. This approach is taken in UNEP calculator. It's a fairly standardized and powerful calculator which is available online, that allows you to kind of do some projections and also study the GHG impacts, right? So these are multiple methods where you kind of see that how your vehicle fleet will grow in forward years, and basis to those target settings that we did for different vehicle segments. So you see that here I am saying that the light wheelers will achieve 100% faster. The private car will achieve the 100% in later years, but then there is a curve of adoption for different years, and that translates into how many EVs will get registered year on year. right? And they're breakup by the vehicle segments. And then you can also estimate that how many vehicles are moving out. Again, that's a very hard problem to solve. Most of the country governments track vehicles getting registered, but no one tracks like what vehicles are going out. There is no established route of disposing a vehicle. So what vehicles are going out? What is the country stock? You really have to estimate. So data sanity is important, but I think we also have to be practical what data can be achieved in the time frame and what trends we can capture to keep moving forward. So I think stock projections and EV capture becomes another important metric. So by 2045 and above, you will see 100% EV in annual sales, but in stock, it would have penetrated some 20 or 30%, right? So different metrics, we have to be careful in handling the metrics. Then, as I said, different vehicle segments will have their different charging preference. You and me as a car user will most likely prefer to charge our car at home when it is stationed idle, right? So home charging will form a higher segment. Here I have assumed basis to some trends that 80% personal car segment will resort to home charging and remaining will go for some kind of public charging, right? And when I say home, this may also include the office charging as well, typically AC slow charging, right? But when you're looking at buses, typically it will charge at its own respective captive charging points at the depot or the terminals. So most of the charging or all the charging will happen at those points. Three-wheelers mixed use, even though it's a fleet for commercial taxi or cargo applications, but people are individual owners, operators. So they will take the vehicles for home charging. Some of them employed under a fleet will do captive charging, while some of them, because of the more running distance and smaller battery size or battery swapping, they will do more frequent public charging or battery swapping. So basis to some of understanding of this characteristics, what level of chargers they will use between AC and DC, you are then able to estimate how many chargers you will need for meeting the targets of EVs that you have set, right? So for those 20,000 of EV stock that we will reach in year 2050, you are requiring some 500 of the public chargers here, right? So that ratio of 500 chargers to 20,000 total EVs. And of that, if you kind of take the cars, that is around 12,000. So you are in the ratio of somewhere around, I would say 18. So one charger is serving kind of 18 cars. So that's the kind of a ratio that comes out to it. The world average today is around 10 to 12. So I think for the developing country and small it is, I think it's a fairly okay number to target that kind of a public charging in the charging ratios. Uh, I will not spend again time, but this is a very important element on the energy part of it. So the previous, what kind of charger, when the charging will happen, for what of those segments, it translates into two very important metrics. How many more electricity units EVs will take? In this case, I am saying that by 2030, it will be hardly 0.5%. And in 2050, it will become 9%, right? And in case of the peak load, which is a very important element because the grid has to become available to supply that kind of peak. If all the vehicles will come together for charging, it will create a grid stability issues if it is not being well planned. So our estimations are that this EV impact on the peaks load in this years will remain less than 1% by 2030. And if it takes the shape of that 100% adoption that we have assumed, then that peak load becomes important, 20% in 2050, right? Of course, there are too many ifs in terms of assuming where this charging will happen, what point of the time. But this kind of analysis starts allowing us to think like at what point of time after reviewing how much EV adoption has taken, the grid should start kind of thinking of upgrading faster. than a normal load, because EV as a load is coming faster, right? The peak load adds up faster than the million units. So that has to be kept in mind when you are planning for it. And basis to all these things and the barrier analysis that we did across the value chain, you start putting your roadmaps, right? We discuss about setting up EV targets different for two-wheelers to buses and trucks. Then for those two-wheelers, buses, trucks, what kind of charging infrastructure, what numbers, AC, DC, what locations that we discussed, what is the impact on the grid, right? How the grid will grow, what more upgradations will be required. So that also allows us to set the how much RE really we wants to do if we want to reduce the footprint, and EV production targets for any kind of local supply chain points. In demand points, that if you distinguish between fiscal and non-fiscal policies, in fiscal you can start thinking of what capital subsidies needs to be given, right? Remember that electric bus, the TCO parity was not coming till 2037. So it clearly kind of says that, okay, government would have to offer incentives. Now government has option that incentive will be in form of taking out all the import duties, all the VAT that goes into the system, and plus further providing any subsidy more if required, right? So that is a special extension of capital subsidy that may require for electric buses. But for other segments like two-wheelers or four-wheelers, maybe it is not required, right? At least in the personal segments, right? You maybe incentivize the commercial segment more because you see the return on investment is faster, right? So all those analysis then starts giving us that what kind of taxation change, capital subsidy interventions, interest subventions you can start doing to incentivize EVs, right? And another method could be like how you disincentivize ICE adoptions, right? If government needs these funds to support EV incentives, the pool of that fund, can it come from the ICE vehicles, right? Can government consider increasing the taxation on ICE vehicles, on fuels, right? Fossil fuels, so that it creates that pool, but that pool should be strictly then used for the purpose of driving e-mobility and not mixed between other applications, right? So those are the ways to start balancing of the government budgets by defining those fiscal policies. A lot of non-fiscal policies also play important roles in terms of setting up clear zones where EVs are allowed, right? Setting up preferred charging slots in the new buildings or in the shopping malls and other kind of things. Banning ICVs in certain of the areas so that it starts giving signal to the users. So this kind of non-fiscals also starts playing an important role on the demand sides. Supply side, we discussed like how do you make the land and capital available for charging infrastructure. The initial years, because of the slow uptake of EVs, the public charging infrastructure business is a little hard business if it does not get a long capital at concessional financing. Yeah. So how can we supply that concessional development financing to such long infrastructure like EV charging infrastructure, depots, and others, which can start bringing the cost down and provide some facilitation to these users in the early years of adoptions, right? Similarly, improving upon the grid upgradations and RE. Is your electricity cost too high because of lot of cross subsidy and other things? Can you free it up from such subsidies and other overheads for a short time to allow the user to transition to the EVs, right? So again, very country dependent elements that has to be looked into. Can you start mandating some of the segments like government fleet or e-commerce players to start adopting EVs by increasing numbers in their fleet, right? So those kind of mandates also start playing on the supply side measures. Skills, very important. Like as P Manifold, now we are running a academy where we are training different set of roles for EVs adoptions, including the technicians, including the student learning, engineering and management, including working professionals, very different need. but how do we transition these talents to start adopting and supporting the new energy and e-mobility domain. So these are then the policy measures which starts taking shapes for the overall thing. Let me take a pause here. Uh, Johanna, do we have questions to discuss?
So far, we have not received questions, but let's take a short break to see if we get questions in. Let's take a quick Q&A. Maybe we could start, Rahul, with a question from myself, because I've been wondering. I think, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation so far. I think it's really great that you are taking us through this really practical examples or concrete examples. So it's very clear what is actually required and needed as part of these steps for developing a roadmap. I've been wondering how long, in your experience, how long does it usually take to develop this kind of a roadmap? I know we haven't gone through all of the steps yet, but your experience, including all the analysis needed in the background, how long is this kind of a process usually in countries? And we have a couple of more questions coming in, so let's take those
Think, would say
after
six
that.
months is a good time, Johanna, to develop such a roadmap. And if it takes more time, then I would say it's more about the data and getting to the right stakeholders to kind of talk to each other, talk to us, share the appropriate data points. I think that I see as a challenge, like having worked with so many countries. And that's where I think a right level of modeling and facilitating those decisions that, okay, this is why we need that data. I think that approach has worked very well for us. And I have seen stakeholders fairly considerate once you really involve them and they know like what we are trying to do and why, that gets them involved. So I think 6 months, I would say, is a good time period to build a good quality roadmap at a country level, Joanna.
Thank you, Rahul. Let's take the two questions. I'll read both of them to you, and you can then respond to them that we have come in from through the chat. So the first one is a bit more general, perhaps. I'm not sure if you have a response to this, but globally, from Pavan, globally there's a decline in EV adoption. Any clear indicator or reason for why? And the second question from Mark is relating to the modeling work here. So does the model that you just presented account for the partial replacement of the number of private two-wheelers for private four-wheelers over time, if we assume an overall GDP growth, or the potential of policies to shift a percentage of the trips from private to share modes of transportation occurring a reduction of a number of private vehicles, or do these kinds of behavior changes usually are they accounted for, or do they have a marginal impact on the roadmap? And we
Uh,
have a third one as well, but let's pause here and take these two first.
Sure, sure. So let me answer Mark's question. Mark, that's a very good question. And I think it's kind of very important to get it right. And again, it depends on the time and the data available to you, right? But these are all the behaviors which are important to capture appropriately, depending on country to country, and bring it into your model adoptions. So yes, two-wheelers users are ambitious to move to four-wheelers. I think you will see this very often in Africa. Um, for private personal use, two-wheelers are not getting used.
Abhijender.
Most of the bikes are
Yeah,
getting used for commercial taxi applications.
yeah.
So,
Hi, Sandeep, how are you?
oh, uh, Ramesh,
Sorry,
let me ask you
can
a
So,
everyone
question.
please mute?
I know you were off day leave today, right? So just came now, is it?
I think we can mute him, Joanna.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Christina, can you help mute?
I think he's mute
Yeah,
now.
yeah, it's muted.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yes,
Sorry.
there are ambitions in two-wheeler personal or a user at home to transition directly to the car segment, and I think that ambition in many of the African countries, you see is seeing the very fast growth in the private car sector. So you start adjusting some of this cross vehicle movements that are possible to happen, some by science, some by arts, Mark, I would say. You also start thinking like, okay, the bus segment is completely broken today, right? At least the formal scheduled bus systems, but there is a para transit informal one like the combis or the smaller seaters, 11 to 16 seater vans which are running and carrying huge amount of load. So you have to understand that okay, what loads can go into that, and if you start bringing like more bigger bus segments, because you need to then create a separate segment into your modeling, that okay, you are not just talking of bus, you are breaking the bus also into three segments, right? A mini bus, a medium bus, a big bus. Similarly, in trucks, you may want to break it into the low, medium, and high duty vehicle segments. So that segmentation, sub-segmentations, and how will you drive the movement across these sub-segments has to be taken care. And the more better assumptions and trends capture you have, the more closer you will be to the reality. How it unfolds in future is fairly not known to anyone, Mark. But I think as a planner, designer, and engineer, I think the sub-segmentations we do, the better trends we can capture within that. And I think there was a question, Johanna, the first one, I think from why EVs are kind of declining. I think, see, the technology is efficient, right? It's a six times efficient. You put 100 units into a petrol vehicle, you get only 15 out of it. You put 100 units into a EV and you get 85 out of it, right? So the technology is efficient. Now there are a lot of policies, a lot of supply constraints, pricing distortions that starts happening over and above it, which starts affecting the value chain, right? So those are the reasons that it starts moving. Like in India, when there were subsidies coming from the government under FAME schemes, there was high intake, right? When the subsidies were withdrawn, it took some time for the users to kind of rebalance, and there was a decline in the sales. But with that awareness and other things, now it is starting to see a stable movement, even without subsidies in those segments, right? So I think those are the trends, or those are the policies and world dynamics that starts affecting some of the adoptions. But yes, I think in terms of the technology, there is a case of strong case of efficiency. Now I think the whole idea of this road mapping and doing all this analysis is to drive it rightly and navigate it so that we reach to the goal point in an accelerated fashion.
Mm. Thank you, Rahul. I think in the interest of time, we have three more questions, but let's save those to the end of this session, if that's okay, because we have 25 minutes left. So perhaps, Rahul, you want to take us through the rest of the presentation, and then we'll answer as many questions as possible at the end. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And I will try to wrap up faster. So this is the slide that I was saying that, okay, now you have policy measures, you have targets, and you are now assessing what it would mean on the government budgets, right? Because your increase in EV sales is adding some reduced taxations to the government, because you're also asking taxation benefits, and those reduced EV sales will reduce government taxations, and that is a huge part of their taxation revenues. Reduced ICE vehicle would also mean reduced gasoline and diesel, so that's also a lower tax collected by the government, right? But yes, there are forex savings. There is some taxation on the sale of electricity, and it's a new load that is coming, right? So the net out of it in many of the countries go on the net outgo from the government budget, right? But there are positives that adds to it, and there are levers that you can then accommodate in your roadmap, that if the net outgo is government okay to increase taxation on the fossil fuels. It's one very simple reserve that a very small sense of changes in the fossil fuel output taxations kind of create a green cess which can take up all your government budget across the years to fuel e-mobility, right? And you don't need fueling for all the years also. You need it for those early 4, 5, 6 years till the market itself starts running about it. So I think these are the levers that we need to kind of look into to kind of really ensure that you are able to communicate your roadmap develop to the government and important stakeholders, get their ownership with understanding, because then only the execution will start happening, right? So that this is a very, very important piece to get the buy-in from different departments. And ultimately, your roadmap will look something like this, right? Like you are saying, okay, these are my targets in terms of timelines in next 5 years, 10 years. Many of countries go for 2050 roadmap for EVs. I think it's too long a time period. Lot of things are going to change. My suggestion to many of the countries is like go for next 10 years roadmap, right? First, understand it, drive some actions, make it happen. When you have seen it, evolve it, and feel the need for forward years, then you go for a longer years. But just for the sake of going for till 2050, it's a very, very, it's doable, but I think the sanity of your calculation starts deviating with big deltas then, right? And then around the demand targets, again, what all measures, who will do it? Will it be done by Ministry of Finance? Will it be done by Ministry of Transport or Energy or local government? It's good to start kind of defining so that this all different departments can start collaborating effectively, and what timelines this will add. So this is a form of an end output which your roadmap should look like. Just a very simple summary given to the stakeholders. You can break this roadmap for different stakeholders that, okay, you are supposed to do one, two, three things in this timelines across these initiatives. I think then it becomes a powerful way of engaging actions to the roadmap. Uh, I attempted this slide. I am working in Kenya for developing their EV charging infrastructure roadmap. And I find a good level of organization there where they have created a structure where they are clear that, okay, this ministry will lead this working group, this kind of CSO or a multilateral donor or development fund will support this kind of initiative in terms of funding or in terms of technical assistance, and lot of things kind of getting achieved, right? So it's a very early stage, but I think getting started to think in terms of boxes with non-overlapping mandates led by different right agencies or department, and attaching a right kind of a multilateral and a CSO partners and other things. I think that structure can lead to a more organized planning and organized executions, because developing roadmap is only a small means to an end, but it has to then be supported by right actions, by right projects, pilot projects, lot of technical assistance, lot of financing, and a lot of regulation changes, and all this has to happen hand in hand. I see a lot of struggle beyond development of roadmap taking to the actual executions in many of the countries we are involved, also at the implementation phase now. So I think that kind of institutional structure, I think, will really be good. I just want to give one top message that there is no thumb rule. Each country is different, very, very different characteristics. We need to understand and study those countries. I've tried to indicate some of the very top parameters which start distinguishing the country characteristics for transport level in terms of their modes, in terms of their EV stock. Do they have a local industry? In terms of their electricity, what kind of sources of electricity generation, how much RE penetrations, are they deregulated between generation, transmission, distribution? Is solar already kind of optimal in terms of its pricing compared to the general grid tariffs? I think all these things starts helping you to understand that how that country will differ from any other countries, right? What is the fuel standard they are using? What is the price of the fuel? Why is it so costly in that country compared to its neighbor or some other regional countries? Why solar is costly? Why it's not happening even when the world is talking of driving to high RE? Why solar is not happening? I think all these things then start giving the clues like how this country is different and why its e-mobility roadmap has to be looked into differently and what segments here can be prioritized to go for electrifications. I have also tried to lay down some of the important planning integrated on the EVs and the charging side. I think in lack of time, I will let you look into the presentations as shared that it will be shared with you. This is one study we did it in India, and we developed this framework that okay, like India has seen EV revolution in last 8+ years now, but still it public charging infrastructure has less evolved, right? In some of the global targets in terms of EVSC ratio to EVs and others. So we went into looking across the nodes that what are those challenges, right? It's typical land challenge, access of lands, access of electricity and upstream connections at lower cost to the charge point operators, right? How do we drive common interoperability in terms of payments so that a user can pay with not necessarily a fixed wallet, but any other easy things across, right? How do we improve the utilization of these chargers for better viability to the users? So across these nodes, we identified what are the issues which are hampering India EV charging scale up, and then against those same points line by line what is the potential solution, again practical, and consulted a lot with industries that can work is what we kind of did that. And now this is against kind of an implementation and improving upon the EVCI roadmap of the country, right?
Rahul,
Similar.
we have 15 minutes left for your information.
Thank you, Joanna. I will finish it up in less than 5 minutes now. In electric buses, it starts with like how do you prioritize what routes in a city you want to go electric buses. Then there are tools where we undertake a lot of detailed energy modeling and understand how much it will consume the battery power once it runs on these buses. Both directions, different point of the time of the day, during peak, non-peak, so that we have the sensitivity to the energy consumption and sensitivity also because of AC and non-AC uses. And basis to that, we go into the battery sizing, right? And battery sizing is a very integrated process of the needs, what we discussed in earlier slide, but also where we can put charging, right? In many of the countries where we are working, we are not recommending a complicated charging ecosystems of frequent charging, right? It is possible by technology today, but by their first experience, by the abilities to manage and operate that kind of a system, so we kind of take those judicious judgment and discussion after understanding the local supply chain. Should we go with a bigger battery so that charging happens at the depot either once in a night or maybe only twice, but not in each trip, right? So those are kind of judicious call that you take integrated between battery and charging. And then you figure it out like, okay, what are the measures? As I said, like you require some central assistance by the local or the national government to be able to make it attractive for that operator to change to e-buses, right? So what form of those incentives can come so that e-buses kind of comes at a parity with the diesel cost to him, right? So that also is important to kind of keep in mind when you do the e-buses and charging integration. It's one of the important element of roadmap, but how beyond that roadmap you take a deeper feasibility to start implementing e-buses is what I'm sharing. This is an example of an e-truck. We have helped develop a national roadmap for electric trucks in India. Started with again segmentation. Let's look into all those 20 use cases of trucks where we know that where our emissions are lying. so that then you know like where you want EVs electrification impact, and then you can use that to set up the targets, like where in those different segments EV adoptions by feasibility, by TCO, by industry readiness can happen, and that allows you to give up a target at a national level. And then you kind of devise this kind of a strategy that, okay, in this year, this segment should be prioritized and they are more ready to be driven for e-bus adoptions and sorry, e-trucks adoption. And this signaling is very, very important coming at a national level, because it then starts signaling the OEM that what kind of trucks, what we need, right? What kind of corridors at national level. We undertake a very detailed work with RMI to kind of start with 125 corridors in India, and finally kind of reaching to 10 identified corridors where through government intervention the first electrifications can happen to start fueling the ZET adoptions. So I think this can become your those integrated projects beyond and after roadmap development to start bringing actions and results into the roadmap. So let me stop here, Johanna.
Thank you so much, Rahul. I think this has been really, really informative, and we are getting quite a few questions. So let's continue with those that we received in the last Q&A and try to get through as many as possible. So there was one from David on how this process of developing e-mobility roadmaps can translate into the country's NDCs when there's a lot of rubberiness associated with target setting. There's an iterative process for setting these realistic targets, dependency on governments adopting policies, etc. So that's one question. Let's take two here, if that's okay. So another one, if what do governments need to see in the final roadmap to feel confident in their ability to manage the risks in the transition, or to anticipate the costs relating to mitigating these risks. So let's take the two of these kind of relating to government priorities.
Sure, sure. So I think answering David's question, hi David. See, NDCs keeps happening in pretty 5 years kind of thing update. Many of the developing countries have their NDC 2.0 updated and they are working on enhancing it with NDC 3.0. Many of these NDCs, in the way they get developed, are not very quantitative, David, as they should be. But they do make a point or position in place saying that, okay, the country should adopt EVs and some percentage by some national benchmarks are given. Lot of rush is also there in some of the NDC designs, because many of the multilaterals and donor agencies support those projects in the country if the NDC supports that e-mobility policy, right? So I think, yes, it is a process of doing it right and ensuring that between different national policy documents, we have the right kind of an information, but the depth is coming later in the time. So I think using NDC for a placeholder that, okay, it will do e-mobility adoptions, drive e-mobility in so and so use cases. I think those becomes important. And I think when there is such a detailed roadmap developed, I think updating the NDC with that, I think that's a practical approach that I see. We cannot stop one because the other is not completed. I think we have to keep moving forward, David. So that is my thought, how e-mobility roadmap targets can be incorporated into the NDC in its enhancement cycle, David. Johanna, can you remind me the next question related to the government? Like what is that thing on the government?
Yes. So what the government needs to see in terms of, or what do they need to feel confident in their ability to manage the risks and the costs relating to those risks, the roadmap?
Right. See, I think like I have seen like fairly professionals working on the government side, and they do understand the logic. they do understand the uncertainties and assumptions. So I think like the step-by-step approach of showing like how you have arrived at this target, right? What it would cost, what kind of a money only for what years you are asking. You are not being unreasonable by saying that, hey, I want 0% VAT for all EVs and for all spares and for all batteries for all the years till 2040, right? You are actually being reasonable to say that, okay, your two-wheeler and three-wheeler likely do not need this exemption, but your car, commercials, and your buses require it for this reason of prioritizations, right? And that prioritization is in terms of also the GHG advantage that you can give by driving this segment into e-mobility. So I think I have seen that a good kind of a budget understanding of understanding government's budget and spend and the benefits that the country may reap and the kind of financing it can bring, right? And the kind of deep economy in terms of local industry, I have seen that it makes governments confident that we are also developing and investing this money for growing and developing their industry ecosystem. So that one lever of local industry and economic growth, I think attracts the government in addition to the GHG and clean air kind of a benefit, John. Jonna, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Um, Thank you so much, Rahul. I think we have time for two more comments at least, or questions. So let's take those. There was one from Moshi on the need for upskilling that you mentioned during the presentation. So the question is, would you also consider organizational reform to be part of a roadmap? And then perhaps another question from Pramod, where he's talking about a question regarding financial viability of EVs, considering the fact that there is a limited guarantee period provided by the OEMs, and further, the battery life is also limited. So how are these factors, or how can these factors be dealt with in a roadmap? And if you have any examples from another country.
So Pawan, I think that apprehension of new technology, battery life, what will happen later, I think that plays very strong in terms of the customer mindsets. Uh, I think slowly the technology and performance are answering some of these questions. Some of the new models like battery swapping or detachable batteries are also answering those questions that you don't own the battery, you don't
True,
spend that additional capex on the battery, but you only use it and you pay as a service model.
true.
There are a lot of new battery leasing and financing models, again,
Correct.
which takes a higher ownership of the batteries, insurance, its usage, and technology risks. So I think the world is innovating in terms of trying to take care of these concerns, both from technology side as well as the financial sides. Now, how does it play a role into the roadmap development? I think we do a lot of this analysis inside the TCO modeling, Pranav, like what is the TCO today, what it will act in forward years because of this life, battery life, usage years, and other things. So that goes into kind of planning there. So yes, it does become part of that in the overall roadmap in that format, Pawan. And Johanna, like Moshi's question, like regarding upskilling and organizational reforms, I think that's a very, very important question, Moshi. I think the organizations who are made the lead to developing these roadmaps, I think it is very useful to kind of involve them during the development of the roadmap, right? I also think that requires a little change of the technical assistance format also. I keep speaking to this with lot of donor agencies that I am a consultant, but in the way the capacity building today kind of gets executed through different contracts, I think it's the consultant capacity that is building and not the country stakeholders, right? So I think it has to start changing in terms of allowing the consultants to work more closely with the stakeholders, right? Sharing and working in a very collaborative format under a right structure, because you just cannot put the risk to all it on the consultant. So it has to be rightly organized so that the country takes ownership of the development, provides the data, understand what it means. So I think capacity building and development of such roadmaps, including broader energy transitions or net zero roadmaps, I think that can be a new world which I look very excitedly to work with Moshi and Johanna.
Thank you, Rahul. Maybe we can end with a very good question, I think, for the end, which is what KPIs should be included in the roadmap for tracking progress effectively?
That's a good question, Shobit. I think just once you define the roadmap, if you see into the roadmap view that I kind of gave, right? I think just tracking those KPIs on each of these elements is important, right? Like if you have defined this is the targets that you should achieve year on year, how much against that target you have achieved for those different segments. Same for chargers, right? Same for your internal productions and localizations, right? Then similarly getting into all the different modes that, okay, you envisioned to kind of provide this GST benefits on these vehicles. Has it happened, right? If it has not happened, where does it stand through, right? Is the roadmap that is developed is also enough legislated? Has it been translated into enough next steps, policies, regulations by the department? So I think breaking this roadmap into those next two or three, step one, step two, step three, which will really make Ministry of Finance agree to this interest subvention 1, 2, 3, and tracking them as yes, no, happened or other part. I think those will be again practical KPIs to measure that if these steps have been taken. So I think that is how I would think assigning the KPIs by diving into a little detailed RASI matrix against each of these measures, what exactly to be done by whom, and then putting yes, no, or it is achieved or it is under process. So that could be a good way to e-mobility. So I think put the KPIs on the lead indicators, which are doing these activities rather than lot on the lagging indicators on performance. So I think that is more useful for the early development phase where the industry stands on e-mobility, Shobit. But very, very interesting and good question, Shobit.
Great. Thank you, Rahul. I think, unfortunately, we have to stop here, but I think it has been extremely informative. We will be sharing the PowerPoints to the registered participants, so you will be able to go back and look at all the insights that Rahul brought us today. Thank you so much, Rahul, for your time, for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. I think this was extremely helpful, very concrete, yes, very insightful. And thank you everyone for joining us, for your active participation, excellent questions coming in. Really great to have you on board as well. And do join us tomorrow in our workshop on light electric vessels, which will start tomorrow at 12 noon Manila time. I've shared the link in the chat. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you, Rahul.
everyone. Thank you,
Thank you,
Rahul. Thank you,
Christina.
Yana.
Thank you.
Thank you.